Before the stadiums, before the Super Bowl halftime shows, before the Grammy records and the magazine covers and the billion-dollar brand, there was a house on Parkwood Drive in Houston, Texas. And in that house, a little girl practiced in front of a mirror until her feet ached, until her voice cracked, until she got it right. That house doesn't look like what you'd expect. It's not a mansion. It wasn't gated. It didn't announce itself. And that, more than anything, tells you everything you need to know about how Beyoncé became who she is. Most people searching for Beyoncé's biography or her early life before fame get the polished version, the accolades, the records broken, the stages conquered. Today, you're getting the real one, because her origin story, her real one, is rooted in home. In the quiet, unglamorous, deeply intentional spaces that shaped one of the most powerful women on the planet. And today, we are going inside that story. We're talking about the family that built the foundation, the Houston neighborhood that gave her grit, and the values that quietly transformed into generational wealth most people still don't fully understand. This is not the Beyoncé you see on a stage. This is the Beyoncé that was made in a kitchen, a living room, and a modest Houston suburb. And honestly, that version, that's the most impressive one. The city that doesn't get enough credit. Let's start with Houston. Because if you don't understand Houston, you don't understand Beyoncé. Houston is not Los Angeles. It's not New York. It doesn't perform for anyone. It doesn't dress itself up to be discovered. It's the fourth largest city in the United States, deeply working class in its bones, culturally rich in a way that rarely gets its due, and fiercely, stubbornly proud of what it has produced. Houston gave us Travis Scott, Megan Thee Stallion, Lizzo, Bun B, the Ghetto Boys, Solange, and of course, Beyoncé Giselle Knowles, born September 4th, 1981, at Park Plaza Hospital. There's something about that city, something in the heat, in the humidity, in the way people there tend to keep their heads down and work that produces artists who don't just perform greatness, they embody it. They build it, brick by brick, from the inside out. Houston doesn't give you shortcuts, and it didn't give Beyoncé one either. She grew up in a city where you earn your place, where community means something real, where showing up for family isn't optional, it's identity. And those values? They never left her, no matter how far her career took her from the Lone Star State. What separates Beyoncé from nearly every other pop star of her era is that the city never left her either. You can hear Houston in the way she moves, in the way she carries silence, in the unhurried confidence she brings to every room she enters. Unlike most artists who abandon their roots the moment a record label comes calling, Beyoncé brought hers with her and built her entire empire on top of them. The Knowles family blueprint. Now let's talk about the family, because if Houston is the setting, the Knowles family is the story. Matthew Knowles, her father, was a medical equipment salesman. He was ambitious, driven, meticulous about detail, and he had a gift for spotting potential, including in his own daughter. Matthew grew up in Gadsden, Alabama, the son of a family that understood hard work and understood, in a deeply personal way, what it meant to be Black in America. He moved to Houston, built himself up professionally, and by the time Beyoncé was born, he had carved out a comfortable middle-class life. Her mother, Tina Knowles, now Tina Knowles-Lawson, is perhaps one of the most quietly extraordinary women in the story of American pop culture. Tina was a hairdresser. She was a seamstress. She ran her own hair salon, Headliner's Hair Salon in Houston, for years. She was the woman who made Beyoncé's early costumes by hand, those bold, sequined, attention-grabbing outfits that made Destiny's Child look like they belonged on every stage they ever stood on. Tina didn't just support her daughter's dream, she stitched it together. Literally. And here's what's important to understand about that. Tina's contribution is a perfect early example of what we're calling quiet wealth in this video. She wasn't spending lavishly. She wasn't outsourcing to expensive designers. She was building equity, creative equity, professional equity, brand equity using skill, time, and intention. Those handmade costumes were investments, and the return on them was incalculable. Matthew and Tina were not rich when Beyoncé was young. They were resourceful, and that distinction matters enormously. The house on Parkwood. One of the most interesting things you'll find when you look into Beyoncé's childhood home and early life in Houston is how deliberately normal her home was. Most people searching for where Beyoncé grew up expect a story that begins with wealth. It doesn't. The family lived in a modest home in a middle-class Houston neighborhood, not far from the energy of the city, not deep in the suburbs either, just solidly in the middle. A house where two parents were working, where two daughters, Beyoncé and her younger sister Solange, were growing up, where dinner was a family event and church on Sunday was not optional. That normalcy was not an accident. Tina Knowles has spoken in multiple interviews about the importance she placed on keeping Beyoncé grounded, even as her talent became increasingly obvious. When other parents might have uprooted everything and moved to Los Angeles chasing the dream, the Knowles family stayed in Houston as long as they could. They stayed connected to community. They stayed connected to each other. That decision to stay rooted, even as everything around Beyoncé's career began to accelerate, is foundational to understanding how she later managed wealth and legacy so differently. From other artists of her generation, you cannot separate the discipline of the adult from the environment of the child. The house on Parkwood didn't just shelter a little girl, it built one. Street, Mary's, and the church connection. If there's one institution outside the family home that shaped Beyoncé's identity with equal force, it's the Black church. Specifically, St. John's United Methodist Church in Houston, where Beyoncé sang in the choir as a child. This is something that doesn't get discussed enough in the broader cultural conversation about her artistry. The Black church in America is one of the most powerful incubators of performance, community, and spiritual resilience that has ever existed. It is where generations of musicians, orators, civil rights leaders, and artists found their voices not just literally, but in every sense of the word. For Beyoncé, the church choir was her first stage, and the congregation was her first audience. She learned something there that no vocal coach, no talent show, and no record deal could have taught her: how to make a room feel something, how to use her voice not just as an instrument, but as a bridge between herself and the people listening. There is a directness in her performance style, that thing she does where you feel like she's singing specifically to you, that is deeply rooted in the Black church tradition. It is not a technique she picked up in a studio. It is something that was placed inside her in a church pew in Houston, Texas, before she was old enough to understand what it would become. And the values that run through her music: resilience, faith, femininity, ancestry, the sacred nature of motherhood and womanhood. Those didn't come from a marketing team. They came from a culture, from a family, from a faith tradition passed down through generations. The Beyoncé who almost wasn't. Here's something that doesn't get told enough. The road to Destiny's Child was not smooth. And the version of Beyoncé we know almost didn't make it. There were early groups. There were failed record deals. There was a period in the mid-90s when the girls originally called Girls Time auditioned for Star Search, the talent competition, and lost. They lost on national television. And for a family that had sacrificed so much, that moment could have been the end, but it wasn't. And here is where the Houston DNA really shows up. Matthew Knowles made a decision that was extraordinarily bold for a man with a stable career and a mortgage. He left his job. He became his daughter's full-time manager. He moved the family's financial resources carefully, methodically toward building what would become one of the most successful music careers in history. Now, there is complicated history around Matthew's management. There are business disputes, financial disagreements, and a separation between him and Beyoncé professionally that was painful and public. We are not going to skip over that. But what's important for the purposes of this story is what his early commitment represents. He believed in something he couldn't yet see. He bet on potential before it was proven. He treated his daughter's talent like an asset, and he was willing to restructure his entire financial life around protecting and growing it. That is a foundational mindset. It is the same mindset Beyoncé herself has operated from for the past 2 decades. You don't spend the principal, you invest it. The quiet wealth that built itself. Let's talk about money, because this is a channel about quiet wealth. And no story about Beyoncé is complete without understanding the financial architecture she has built and where that architecture came from. When people talk about Beyoncé's net worth, estimated anywhere from $500 million to over $1 billion, depending on the source and the year you're looking at, they almost always miss the more important conversation. It's not about the number. It's about the structure behind the number. And that structure is unlike almost anything else in the music industry. She doesn't just earn from music, she earns from music ownership. She doesn't just license her image, she controls her image through companies she owns. Parkwood Entertainment, named, not coincidentally, after that Houston street, is her production company, her management company, and her creative studio all in one. It is the vehicle through which she has retained control over her art, her brand, and her business in ways that most artists of her generation never managed to do. She co-wrote, co-produced, and co-owns the masters to a significant portion of her catalog. When you stream Lemonade, a substantial portion of that revenue flows back to her, not to a label. That's not an accident. That's the result of years of deliberate negotiation, informed by a deep understanding of how the music industry extracts wealth from artists who don't know their contracts well enough. And then there's the real estate. She and JayZ own a property in the Hamptons that was purchased for around $26 million. They own a Bel Air mansion worth roughly $88 million. They have properties in New Orleans, in Paris, and they have been quietly building real estate equity for over 15 years. But here's the thing, none of this is flashy. You don't see Beyoncé giving tours of her houses on reality TV. You don't see her talking about her investment portfolio in interviews. You see her on stage. You see her art. The money is in the background, working, growing, compounding, while the performance is in the foreground. That is the essence of quiet wealth. And it was learned in Houston, in a modest house, from parents who understood that showing off what you have is the surest way to lose it. Solange and the sister dynamic. You cannot talk about Beyoncé's home life without talking about Solange. And you cannot talk about Solange without acknowledging that she is, in her own right, one of the most critically respected musicians of her generation. Solange Knowles is 4 years younger than Beyoncé. She grew up in the same house, with the same parents, shaped by the same Houston culture. And she became something completely different from her sister, not in opposition to her, but alongside her. An artist deeply rooted in jazz, in avant-garde soul, in the intellectual tradition of Black womanhood. Her album, A Seat at the Table, is widely considered one of the most important American records of the 21st century. The Knowles sisters represent something profound about what a strong family foundation produces. It doesn't produce copies. It produces people who are secure enough in their identity to be fully themselves. Solange didn't try to be Beyoncé. Beyoncé didn't try to absorb Solange's lane. They each built their own house, so to speak, because the original house gave them a strong enough foundation to do so. Tina Knowles has spoken about raising both daughters to know their worth, to not seek validation from outside, to understand that their value was not determined by what other people said about them. That teaching, simple, ancient, and profoundly difficult to actually internalize, is something you can trace through both of their careers in the way they handle criticism, competition, and creative risk. What Lemonade was really saying. We have to talk about Lemonade, because if you want to understand the full arc of Beyoncé and Home, that album is the most direct line she has ever drawn between her private world and her public art. Released in 2016 as a visual album, a form she essentially reinvented for the streaming era, Lemonade was a meditation on betrayal, healing, Black womanhood, ancestry, and ultimately, return. Return to self, return to roots, return to the women who came before. The imagery in that film is saturated with the American South, with plantation architecture and Louisiana bayous, and the long shadow of generations of Black women who survived and persisted and passed something down. It is a work of enormous cultural weight. And it is deeply personal. But Lemonade also did something remarkable on a business level. It was released exclusively on Tidal, a streaming platform in which JayZ and Beyoncé both hold ownership stakes for an exclusive window before becoming available elsewhere. It was a billion-dollar artistic statement that was also a masterclass in platform economics. The art and the business were, as always, inseparable. That is what Houston gave her. That is what her mother's sewing sequence at midnight gave her. The understanding that your art is your asset, and an asset, treated with respect and intelligence, builds a legacy. The Houston she returns to. Here's something that matters. Beyoncé has never forgotten Houston. Not performatively, not in the way celebrities mention their hometown when they're trying to seem relatable, but genuinely, structurally, institutionally. After Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston in 2017, Beyoncé and her family donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to relief efforts. She partnered with local churches and community organizations not through a publicist's press release, but through direct, community-level engagement. Her mother, Tina, was on the ground, personally involved. The Baygood Foundation has contributed to food relief, scholarship programs, and community infrastructure in Houston consistently over the years. Not loudly, not with cameras following every donation, quietly. And Parkwood Entertainment, the company she named after her Houston street, has prioritized hiring Black women in positions of creative and executive power in a way that is almost unprecedented in the entertainment industry. She didn't just break a glass ceiling. She handed the keys of the door she walked through to the women who came next. That is a kind of wealth that doesn't appear on a net worth estimate. It's social capital. It's institutional trust. It's the kind of currency that compounds across generations, the legacy of quiet power. So, what does all of this mean? What is the through line from a modest house in Houston to a billion-dollar empire built on creative ownership and intentional privacy? How did Beyoncé build her wealth in a way that almost no artist before her managed to do? The answer starts with family history. It starts with values. It means that the most powerful kind of wealth is not the kind you display. It's the kind you build with values, with discipline, with an understanding of where you came from and a commitment to protecting what you've built. Matthew Knowles bet his career on his daughter's talent. Tina Knowles sewed costumes by hand. A congregation in a Houston church gave a little girl her first audience. A neighborhood that expected nothing from the entertainment industry produced one of the most powerful entertainers in its history. None of that is accidental. All of it is architectural. Beyoncé didn't stumble into legacy. She was constructed for it by a city, by a family, by a culture, by a faith tradition, and by a set of values about money, work, ownership, and identity that she internalized before she was old enough to articulate them. And then she built an empire on top of that foundation, quietly, methodically, in a way that the loudest and most famous people in the world rarely managed to do. From her childhood home in Houston, to the Knowles family's financial sacrifices, to owning her masters and building Parkwood Entertainment, every chapter of Beyoncé's story is a masterclass in quiet wealth. Every decision circles back to the same set of values, the same city, the same house. The house on Parkwood wasn't glamorous, but it was the most important building in the story, because everything that came after it, every stage, every screen, every boardroom, was just that house made bigger. Here's what I want you to take away. Roots matter more than spectacle when it comes to building legacy. Beyoncé's wealth looks exactly like the values she was raised with. Disciplined, intentional, private, designed to outlast the moment. She didn't build Parkwood Entertainment to show off. She built it to own. She didn't name it after a mansion. She named it after a street in Houston where a little girl practiced until she got it right. Generational wealth isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in the decisions nobody sees. The contract clause negotiated quietly. The master recording refused to give away. The company named after the neighborhood, not the penthouse. That is what the Knowles family built. That is what Houston produced. And that is what Beyoncé has never forgotten. Legacy isn't built on a stage. It's built in the spaces between performances. In the values that travel with you from a childhood home to every boardroom, every recording session, every decision about what you own and how you move. Roots matter, not because they're sentimental, Because they're structural. Subscribe if you want more stories about origin homes, quiet wealth, and the real architecture behind the people who changed the world. We'll see you in the next one.